warrant, you need to come to the front door with your hands up.
British boxing champion Anthony Joshua is recovering after being involved in a deadly car crash in Nigeria. Local authorities say Joshua sustained minor bruising in Monday's crash. The crash comes just days after Joshua won a big match against Jake Paul.
Grimacing in pain, Anthony Joshua is pulled from the wreckage of a crumpled SUV, having narrowly escaped death.
The boxing world is in absolute chaos tonight as shocking reports and speculation swirl around Jake Paul and a devastating car crash connected to Anthony Joshua's inner circle. Nothing about this story feels settled, and that uncertainty is exactly what has fans on edge. Here's the timeline that has everyone talking. Just days after Anthony Joshua dominated Jake Paul in the ring, a loss many believe permanently reshaped Paul's boxing narrative, news began circulating about a horrific car crash in Nigeria. The incident reportedly left Joshua himself narrowly escaping death, while two members of his trusted team tragically lost their lives. These weren't random associates. They were people deeply embedded in Joshua's day-to-day camp. What sent the situation into overdrive was the sudden emergence of unconfirmed reports claiming Jake Paul's name had surfaced during the early stages of a federal investigation. Social media immediately erupted with claims of FBI involvement, though no official statement has been released to verify an arrest or formal charges. And that's where the unease sets in. When a global superstar survives a deadly incident, those closest to him don't, and the man he just defeated becomes linked, even indirectly, to an ongoing investigation. The story stops feeling ordinary. Coincidence or not, the optics alone are chilling. Right now, facts are scarce, emotions are high, and speculation is running wild. Until authorities speak clearly, this remains a developing mystery, one that has left the boxing world holding its breath, waiting for the truth to finally surface.
Former world heavyweight champion visibly in pain as he has helped from the wreckage after this horror crash that killed two people. Anthony Joshua was injured and taken to hospital.
What should have been a quiet, celebratory post-fight victory trip turned into something far darker, the kind of moment that freezes time and sends shockwaves far beyond boxing. In the dead of night, under conditions no one could have predicted, a high-end SUV carrying Anthony Joshua and members of his inner circle was suddenly thrown into chaos. Picture how fast it happened. 1 second, everything felt untouchable. Victory still fresh, phones lighting up with congratulatory messages, laughter spilling out as they rode the high of a dominant win, smiles, confidence, that sense that the world had finally aligned in their favor. Then, without warning, everything shattered. Metal screamed, darkness swallowed the road. In an instant, celebration gave way to confusion and terror. When the vehicle came to rest, the scene was unrecognizable, flashing lights cutting through the night, sirens echoing across the pavement, and the horrifying realization that not everyone would be walking away. Joshua survived. Others didn't. That's the part that has left people shaken. How a single moment separated life from death. How joy flipped into devastation with no pause, no mercy. It's the kind of tragedy that refuses to feel random, that lingers in the mind long after the noise fades, leaving only questions, grief, and a chilling silence where celebration once lived.
He was travelling in, hit a stationary truck on a busy highway in Nigeria. The British boxer is on holiday in Africa following his win over American boxer Jake Paul.
Here's what makes this situation so difficult to dismiss, and why it immediately drew the attention of investigators instead of being quietly written off as another tragic accident. Anthony Joshua wasn't driving, he was a passenger. That detail alone changes everything. The vehicle was a high-end luxury SUV built with advanced safety systems specifically designed to prevent catastrophic outcomes. Add to that the fact that this wasn't unfamiliar terrain. The road was well known to everyone inside the vehicle, a route traveled before, a stretch of pavement that should have felt routine, even uneventful. On paper, nothing about this trip suggested danger. No risky detour, no unfamiliar conditions, no obvious reason for panic. It appeared stable, controlled, ordinary, until without warning it wasn't. Authorities initially pointed to speed and loss of control as the explanation, but that answer only raised more questions. What caused the loss of control? Why did a vehicle engineered for protection fail so catastrophically? And why did key details emerge so slowly? Information didn't come out cleanly or all at once. It surfaced in fragments, partial statements, delayed confirmations, unexplained gaps. In situations like this, silence becomes its own problem. The longer it stretches, the more suspicion fills the space. When answers arrive piece by piece instead of clearly and confidently, people start wondering what isn't being said. And those questions rarely drift toward harmless conclusions. They linger, they multiply, and they ensure this incident won't fade quietly into the background, no matter how badly some might want it to.
Photos that have emerged online that show him sitting behind the driver's seat with his top off, surrounded with glass.
That was the moment the internet completely snapped, not gradually, not subtly, but all at once. Because when you step back and really look at what unfolded, the picture becomes impossible to ignore. A global superstar survives a catastrophic crash with only minor injuries, barely touched. Meanwhile, two trusted men, people who built their lives around supporting him, protecting him, standing beside him, are killed instantly in the very same vehicle. Same moment, same impact, same chaos. And this didn't happen in a vacuum. The crash came just days after a humiliating, high-stakes fight that shattered reputations, disrupted carefully crafted promotional narratives, and put millions of dollars in future earnings at risk for multiple parties. Careers, contracts, and power dynamics were suddenly in flux. Pressure was everywhere. That's when perception shifted. What might have been written off as a tragic accident began to feel off. The timing felt too exact, too cruel for some, too convenient for others. Official briefings were brief, details were restrained, answers arrived softly, if at all. In that silence, suspicion grew louder than facts. People weren't claiming certainty, they were sensing unease. A feeling that something important sat just below the surface, unspoken and untouched. And once that feeling took hold, it became clear this story wouldn't stay contained. Not with questions hanging in the air that no one seemed eager to confront head-on.
The crash happened on December 29, 2025, on the Lagos-Ibadan motorway near Makun in Ogun State, a stretch of road known for deadly accidents.
It'd be crazy if all of the fighters who fight Jake Paul end up falling some sort of terrible.
Then came the line that changed everything, the comment that pushed this story from tragedy into something far more volatile. In the middle of the fallout, while people were still processing the deaths, the shock, and Joshua's survival, Jake Paul was alleged to have joked that Joshua didn't follow the script. That single phrase detonated online. For some, it sounded like nothing more than reckless boxing bravado, the kind of tasteless trash talk fighters have used for decades to stay relevant and stir attention. In that interpretation, it was insensitive, poorly timed, but ultimately meaningless. For others, it landed very differently. They heard something unsettling, something that didn't sound like hype at all, but like a phrase that carried unintended weight. A slip, a sentence that, when placed against the timing of the crash and the surrounding silence, suddenly felt loaded with implication. Almost instantly, the conversation shifted. No one was arguing about punches, scorecards, or fight outcomes anymore. Instead, people were replaying clips, parsing phrasing, analyzing tone, and questioning intent. Every syllable became evidence to someone. Every pause felt deliberate. Whether the comment was careless, misunderstood, or completely misinterpreted remains unclear. But what's undeniable is its effect. In a story already drowning in unanswered questions, that one line poured gasoline on the fire and turned public curiosity into full-scale scrutiny.
As news broke, shock rippled through Joshua's hometown community in Nigeria. Adamola Joshua, the uncle of Anthony Joshua's father, said the news came as a great shock.
Definitely, it was a shock for us. So he has been coming. At least he comes not less than 3-4 times in a year. So that was not the first time of his coming home. So he comes regularly. I applies that road regularly. So they are very conversant with that road. So it was a great shock.
From that moment on, the story mutated at a speed no one could slow down, let alone control. What began as isolated speculation quickly expanded into something far larger than the fight itself. Screenshots of old messages, archived interviews, heated pre-fight exchanges, and half-forgotten clips resurfaced as people scrambled to assemble a narrative that felt too complex to be accidental. Social media transformed into a full-scale investigation hub. Thousands of self-appointed detectives dissected timelines, compared statements, and linked moments that had never been examined this closely before. Every repost added fuel. Every thread created a new angle. Commentators, both professional analysts and everyday fans, began asking the same questions. Why did that specific phrase surface at all? Why did it appear at that exact point in the timeline? And why did it sound less like standard boxing promotion and more like raw frustration slipping through unfiltered? The words didn't follow the script, took on a life of their own. Stripped from context and replayed endlessly, they stopped sounding casual. They sounded intentional, loaded, heavy in ways no one could ignore. Whether that meaning was real or projected didn't matter anymore. Once the phrase landed, it reshaped the conversation entirely, turning curiosity into obsession and ensuring this story would keep unfolding in public, one theory at a time.
It's that of great love for this man, because he's a man of the people. He's very close to the grassroots. It's not the type that goes about with security guard when he comes around. all the people are very close to him, and he too is very free among the people.
Once that seed was planted in the public consciousness, speculation didn't creep forward, it exploded. It raced across every platform at full speed, unrestrained and impossible to contain. The crash itself, the unsettling silence from key figures, the cryptic comment, the timing that felt almost too precise, all of it fused into one relentless question echoing through social feeds, forums, and comment sections everywhere. People weren't just reacting anymore, they were searching for meaning. Was it simply careless talk from a bruised ego, the kind of reckless line someone throws out when pride is wounded and emotions spill over unchecked? Or was it something else entirely, the first visible crack in a story that was never meant to leave the tightly controlled world of promotion and performance? To some, it felt like a glimpse behind the curtain, a moment where something unscripted slipped through, revealing tension that wasn't supposed to be seen. Whether imagined or real, that possibility changed everything, because once people believe they've seen behind the scenes, they stop accepting surface explanations, and this story, from that moment on, refused to stay simple.
Joshua was in Nigeria following his knockout victory over YouTuber turned boxer Jake Paul less than a fortnight ago, who posted online saying he's praying for those who lost their lives and for his former adversary. Joshua posted this on Instagram playing table tennis with Latif Ayodele just hours before the incident.
This is the point where logic begins to lose ground to perception, and perception becomes more powerful than facts. When enough strange outcomes seem to orbit the same name, the public stops viewing them as isolated events. Patterns begin to form, whether they truly exist or not. Health scares that appear without warning, financial collapses that wipe out empires overnight, careers unraveling in ways that feel sudden, even engineered. On paper, each situation has its own explanation, its own cause, but online they become emotionally linked, woven together into a single, expanding digital narrative. And once that happens, evidence takes a back seat. The story shifts from proof to inevitability, from what happened to this was always going to happen. Social media thrives on that momentum. It amplifies suspicion, rewards connection over accuracy, and turns coincidence into conviction. At that stage, facts don't disappear, they just struggle to compete, because narratives powered by emotion don't need confirmation to survive. They feed on repetition, outrage, and belief. And once that machine starts running, it becomes nearly impossible to slow down, let alone reverse, with simple explanations alone.
While he was travelling in, collided with a stationary truck pictured here in photos taken by the authorities. After his latest victory, what should have been a moment of celebration has instead become one of tragedy.
And that's the shift investigators and public figures fear most. Because once the public convinces itself a pattern exists, every new tragedy starts to feel pre-written, like it was always destined to happen. Each official explanation sounds rehearsed. Every denial feels delayed and defensive, no matter how quickly it arrives. At that point, facts lose their authority. The story stops responding to evidence and starts responding to momentum. And momentum doesn't wait for confirmation or care about nuance. It pushes the narrative forward, reshaping events as proof of something larger, something unresolved. What began as a single crash or a single fight is no longer viewed in isolation. In the public imagination, it's been woven into something deeper, a hidden thread connecting outcomes, intentions, and consequences. Whether that thread actually exists becomes almost irrelevant, because once momentum decides there's more beneath the surface, the story stops asking if there's something being concealed and starts assuming there is.
Gamu, which is where Joshua has relatives. Of course, he fought 10 days ago in Miami, and he was heading home to Nigeria, where he was brought up, or he went to boarding school anyway, for the new year.
Right after the crash, something shifted, and that shift is what reportedly caught investigators' attention. When a global fight generates tens of millions of dollars, crosses borders, and involves private travel, layered logistics, digital contracts, and rivalries fueled by genuine bad blood, any serious incident connected to it instantly becomes larger than sport. That's the invisible line people rarely notice, the moment where entertainment stops being just entertainment. At that scale, accidents aren't viewed in isolation. They're viewed in context. Who was involved? What was at stake? Who stood to gain or lose? What pressures existed behind the scenes? That's when promoters stop controlling the narrative and outside authorities start asking questions. This was no longer just about two fighters or one tragic crash. It became about the entire ecosystem surrounding them, money, influence, timing, and consequences that reached far beyond the ring.
Everybody shouts Anthony Joshua, me too, I go there. Everybody just they do picture. So many everybody no shouting, say they no loud down. So some people loud down.
Behind the scenes, far away from cameras, press conferences, and highlight reels, the conversation reportedly took a different turn. Quiet whispers began circulating about timelines that didn't perfectly line up, about messages that might tell a different story, and about business fallout tied directly to the fight itself. These are the parts fans never see, but investigators are trained to notice immediately. At that level, nothing exists in isolation. Financial trails matter. Communication records matter. Decisions made in the hours and days after a major fight matter just as much as what happened inside the ring. This stopped being about punches, scorecards, or bravado. It became about what unfolded around the event, what was said privately, what actions followed publicly, and what consequences may have been set in motion once the outcome was locked in. When those questions began surfacing through official channels, attention naturally narrowed toward the people closest to the flashpoints in the timeline. And according to circulating reports and speculation, Jake Paul's name appeared uncomfortably close to key moments, close enough to raise eyebrows, even if not answers. To be clear, proximity is not proof, but in high-stakes situations like this, proximity alone is often enough to trigger deeper scrutiny. And once that scrutiny begins, every connection, coincidence, and comment is re-examined under a far harsher light.
Within hours, social media users revived a bizarre theory, one that has circulated before, now being called the Jake Paul curse.
Here's where the story veers into territory that draws federal attention, money, and not just a little of it. Fights at this level aren't simple win-or-lose events for pride. They're dense financial ecosystems, guaranteed purses, performance bonuses, endorsement clauses, betting exposure, future fight options that change value the second the final bell rings. When one side loses badly in a bout of this magnitude, the impact doesn't stop at the scoreboard. It ripples outward through contracts most fans never see. Deals are restructured, options dissolve, valuations collapse or surge overnight. Entire business strategies can be rewritten in minutes. That's where pressure begins to build quietly, behind closed doors. Financial pressure doesn't prove wrongdoing, but investigators treat it as motive terrain. It explains why stakes extend far beyond bruised egos. When millions shift hands instantly and future earnings are threatened, scrutiny follows. Because history has shown, again and again, that extreme financial pressure can push people toward decisions they never thought they'd make.
Fighters who defeat Jake Paul later suffer serious misfortune. Joshua's crash, coming days after his victory over Paul, reignited the theory and pushed it into viral territory.
Behind closed doors, in conference rooms, encrypted calls, and urgent late-night meetings, the tone reportedly shifted fast. Celebration gave way to containment. Sponsors began reassessing optics and distance. Insurers quietly reviewed policy language, searching for exposure. Business partners started asking uncomfortable questions about reputational risk and whether any part of the fallout could spill onto them. That's the moment legal teams step in. Timelines get rebuilt minute by minute. Communications are preserved instead of deleted. Casual messages suddenly become potential evidence. Every off-camera interaction, every private call, every decision made in the hours after the fight takes on new weight, not because guilt is assumed, but because risk now exists. And that's why people stop treating the crash as an isolated tragedy. Once massive financial stakes collide with reputational damage and possible legal exposure, coincidence feels less harmless to everyone involved. Context starts to matter more than intent. Perception becomes a liability. Silence becomes strategy. At that point, the focus shifts completely. It's no longer about punches thrown or rounds lost. It becomes about impact, who absorbed the greatest financial losses, whose future deals evaporated, whose leverage disappeared when everything went sideways. Because in situations like this, investigators don't just ask what happened. They ask who stood to lose the most when it did.
Crazy, if Mike Tyson almost died before the fight, he had 8 blood transfusions, lost half his blood from a bleeding ulcer in the hospital for weeks. Obviously today, it'd be crazy if Anthony Joshua was involved in a fatal car crash where 2 of his friends are now.
Even as official explanations began to surface, the story refused to stabilize the way tragedies usually do. Instead of calming things down, each update seemed to spark a new wave of reinterpretation. Clips resurfaced, screenshots reappeared, old interviews and offhand comments were pulled from archives at lightning speed, reframed to fit a narrative that now felt far bigger than any single incident. With every repost, the timeline stretched backward into past rivalries and forward into imagined consequences, until the crash no longer stood alone. It became the center of a much larger story people felt was unfolding in plain sight. What made this especially volatile was how quickly public perception hardened into certainty. Once enough people decided the sequence of events felt off, every new detail was filtered through suspicion. Routine explanations sounded rehearsed. Standard procedures felt calculated. Silence didn't calm nerves, it amplified curiosity. At that point, the internet stopped waiting. Instead of deferring to official statements, people began constructing their own version of events in real time. Threads replaced briefings. Speculation replaced patience. Thousands of voices contributed fragments, theories, and assumptions. Crowdsourcing and investigation no single authority could fully contain. Whether accurate or not became secondary, momentum took over. And once a story reaches that stage, where belief outruns confirmation, it stops behaving like news and starts behaving like mythology, constantly evolving, feeding itself, and resisting any attempt to neatly close the book.
Gets into a car accident, 2 people die right after Jake Paul said he didn't follow the script. I'm kind of lost. What script? Was it just boxing, or was there something else going on?
That's when the situation crossed a dangerous threshold, the point where a story driven by momentum becomes almost immune to reassurance. Momentum doesn't respond to clarification. It feeds on doubt, silence, and unanswered questions. And with every hour that passed, the central question grew louder and more insistent. How does a single fight, a single crash, and a single name remain this tightly bound without something deeper holding it together? By then, the unease wasn't confined to comment sections anymore. It spread inward into the boxing industry itself. Promoters who normally chase headlines went quiet. Media calls stopped getting returned. Fighters who usually joke, provoke, and post non-stop suddenly pulled back. Even the loudest voices became cautious. That silence spoke volumes. Everyone understood the same thing at once, that this wasn't a story you could casually comment on without risk. Words could age badly. Jokes could resurface. Offhand remarks could be reframed. In an environment like that, saying nothing felt safer than saying the wrong thing. And that realization moved fast, rippling through gyms, management offices, and promotional circles like wildfire. Because stories like this don't fade cleanly, they don't resolve neatly with a single statement or press release. Even if no charges ever come, even if everything is officially explained or cleared, the damage lingers. Reputations carry stains long after facts are forgotten. Doubt leaves residue. And once a narrative embeds itself this deeply, time doesn't erase it. It just buries it under layers of unease that resurface whenever the name is mentioned again.
A reaction there out of Jake Paul, but when he gets caught with his hands down and his chin served on a platter for that right hand right there. And look at Jake Paul's face. He knew it right away. He said, woo!
Hey guys, I'm okay. Just
Privately, away from microphones and public statements, concerns shifted from outrage to fallout. Upcoming fights were suddenly uncertain, dates left floating without confirmation. Sponsorships were quietly reassessed behind closed doors, not with dramatic announcements, but with careful pauses and delayed decisions. Legal teams stepped in early, not because anything criminal had been proven, but because uncertainty itself had become a serious liability. In boxing, perception can be more expensive than a knockout loss. Right now, perception was radioactive. No one wanted to be caught reacting too fast or standing too close while the narrative was still burning hot. Silence wasn't indifference, it was self-preservation. Every association, every public alignment carried risk, and that's why this moment mattered more than the crash alone, more than the controversial comments, more than the wild theories flooding the internet. Because once a story reaches this level of penetration, careers don't wait for verdicts, investigations, or official conclusions. They respond to pressure, promoters adjust plans, networks hesitate, sponsors hedge, fighters reconsider timelines, decisions get made quietly, long before the public ever hears them discussed. Pressure doesn't need proof to be effective. It just needs belief. And that pressure was already squeezing everyone connected to this story, tightening hour by hour, whether anyone wanted to acknowledge it publicly or not. Once that kind of momentum takes hold, the consequences start arriving long before the truth ever does.
Union Jack flag alongside the Nigerian flag when Anthony Joshua fights. He's often spoken so proudly about his Nigerian heritage and his right shoulder. There's often a tattoo of an Africa flag with Nigeria map inscribed in there. So when it comes to Nigeria, Anthony Joshua is very proud of his heritage. He's often seen visiting the country.
This is where the story crossed a critical line from speculation to widespread belief to something that felt real regardless of evidence. The so-called Jake Paul curse stopped being a joke, a meme, or dark humor. It began to be treated like a rule of nature, repeated endlessly across platforms until people spoke about it as if it were already proven fact. Timelines were stitched together by dedicated followers. Names were stacked into lists. Every misfortune tied to a past opponent was pulled into a single, expanding thread that felt impossible to ignore. One event alone meant nothing, but together, repeated over and over, they started to feel deliberate. Creators leaned into it because rhythm generates views. Wouldn't it be crazy if became a drumbeat? Repetition did the rest. Coincidence began to feel organized. Randomness began to look intentional. Health scares that seemed to come out of nowhere. Financial collapses that erased fortunes overnight. Personal implosions that ended careers or relationships. On paper, each event was separate. Each had its own explanation. But emotionally, online, they fused into one narrative with Jake Paul's name sitting at the center. And that's when proof stopped mattering. Familiarity took over. When people hear something enough times, it stops sounding hypothetical. It starts sounding true. The audience didn't need confirmation anymore. The story had repeated itself into certainty. That's the power and the danger of narrative momentum online. Once belief locks in, facts don't correct it. They bounce off. And by the time anyone tries to slow it down, the story already feels permanent.
According to police anyway, they are minor injuries and he is fine. But the family are saying that they are shocked by what's happened. And there was a brief statement, we're hoping for his speedy recovery, they say, and also the people who sadly passed away.
And once that belief sets in deep enough, it becomes self-sustaining, almost impossible to kill. Every new headline feeds the myth and makes it stronger. Every denial doesn't calm suspicion, it sharpens it. Every moment of silence gets reinterpreted as confirmation instead of restraint. That's the tipping point. A theory no longer needs evidence to survive once the crowd decides the pattern feels real. Emotion overtakes verification. In real-time information warfare, feelings outrank facts. Perception becomes truth by repetition alone. At that stage, the question itself splits in two, and neither answer is comfortable. Did the internet manufacture a conspiracy out of tragedy, stitching coincidence into something that never existed? Or did this fight trigger a chain reaction so volatile, so financially and reputationally dangerous, that the people closest to it chose silence because speaking would only make things worse? That's the paradox. Silence can mean innocence. Silence can also mean survival. And once the crowd believes a story has crossed that line, it no longer waits for proof. It waits for confirmation, or for the next tragedy to reinforce what it already thinks it knows.
Adding that he was praying for Anthony Joshua, the victims, and everyone affected.